Good day, ladies and gentlemen. This is Vigilante, and you're watching the Vigilante Effect. And if you're an older subscriber of mine, then you know I have a lot of apologies to make to you because of the fact that I have not been keeping up with my schedule lately, as you can see. But as I've said in the last video, I've really been having a tough time keeping up with the schedule and also doing my full-time job, which is, it's not too demanding, but it's kind of demanding, a lot of paperwork and whatnot. So, but rest assured, I'm definitely going to keep the videos coming on a consistent basis. I'm just trying to figure out what I'm going to do with the schedule. The only thing that stops me from posting a video out is if I don't feel the quality is good enough. And, I try to bring out the videos with the best quality. I don't want to give out just any, like for instance, the funny series, Funny Friday series, have been getting a lot of good feedback lately, and that's because I try to make sure that it's actually somewhat funny. It doesn't have to be everyone likes it, but it has some legitimacy to it, and I just don't want to put anything out. So that's for that. But moving on from that, as you can if you've probably already been following the news lately, then there's a lot of controversy regarding Muslims and Islam. And this has obviously been something that's been for the last 10 or 11 years. But besides that, I'm talking about recently, there was a show that's been released, which is called the All-American Muslim on TLC. And that received controversy by Lowe's pulling off its advertisement, but because a Christian conservative group put pressure on them to take their ads off, saying that this doesn't support the real state of Muslims, that Muslims are actually radicals, and it doesn't show enough of the radicalism of Islam. It basically shows Muslims as regular people, because in reality that's not the case. We're not just regular people, we're all radicals, and that's the way we should be portrayed, like we already are on the media. But no comment on that. I'm not going to even talk about that. Other than that, also there's a bill that's been recently proposed by Congress, and the president has decided not to veto it. And the bill basically states more or less that if you're suspected of terrorism, that's enough of a proof basically against you. You don't need to have a lawyer, you don't need to have trial. That's the end of the story, regardless of whether you're an American citizen or not. And obviously this affects Muslims in that, not because Muslims are terrorists, no, and not because Muslims advocate for terrorism. That's not the case either way, but because of the fact that Muslims are attributed with, when you see terrorism, it's almost like you forget about the realities of what terrorism actually means, and automatically people think Muslim Islam, terrorism, Muslim Islam. Oh, a bombing, that's not necessarily terrorism, but if it's a Muslim does it, that's terrorism. So that's a big deal. But again, I'm not going to touch on that. But what I'm going to talk about is something. Why I mentioned these is because they sparked in my mind the need for me to basically do at least my part for my community. And all I'm going to do is give you what is Islam, and that's it. But I'm just going to try to tell you what Islam is and what it isn't, and basically let people judge for themselves. That's basically it, because a lot of times people don't have the knowledge of what they're talking about or of what they want to talk about, and therefore you have these misunderstandings. So today I wanted to talk about who is Allah, and this is a huge topic. It's something I can't cover in in the span of this video, but I will it will be broken up into parts. And the first part that I'm going to talk about is the belief in God in general, and why is it that Muslims are so committed to their religion, and they believe in their religion so much. So the first thing that we have in our society is the debate of, does God exist, does God not exist? And this is not by any means a way to belittle anybody who, let's say, they don't believe in God, or are agnostic, they're not sure of the belief in God. This is not a forum of belittlement. It's just basically a report of why, just like other people have their reasons for belief, I'm giving my personal reasons for why I believe. And for me, I've been through biochemistry. I've been through psychology. So, I've been through the whole studies of evolution and studies of philosophy. Obviously, I didn't get a PhD in any of them, but I did have to study them, and I did have to pass these courses and get good grades on them. So I did have to question my faith a lot at certain points, and I did really question my faith a lot, and it led me to questioning the foundations, which is, does God exist? And how do we know that God exists? Because for me, I like to be logical about things. And I sat down with myself at a certain time, and I actually had a very deep, logical, philosophical thought. I started thinking, and the issue is not about evolution. It's not about, evolution does not discredit the belief in the existence of God. All evolution explains is how things are progressing, how humans came. First there was the molecules, they evolved into bacteria, and that evolved into eukaryotic cells and multicellular organisms, and on and on and on until you have humans. But it doesn't tell you that God doesn't exist, that God didn't make things start with. It just tells you how things progressed. So when it came to me thinking about it, here's my conclusion. I thought, you know what? There's the arguments of complexity. People talk about, if you have a machine, if you have a computer, and you just saw a computer in the desert, you're not going to think, oh, this computer came into existence over, thousands and thousands of years, and just the parts came together, and this plastic came with this plastic, and then it suddenly formed a motherboard, and then 1,000 years later the motherboard finally got a hard drive, and then all of a sudden afterwards you have a computer with a monitor. 5,000 years later, the wind pushed it, and etc., etc. So if you can't believe that, and if you can't say that to yourself, that, oh, this didn't come from nothing, something created it, some person made it, then what about the person who made the computer in the first place? What about the brain and its complexities, and the human body and all its molecular complexities? I'm not going to go with that argument. It's been, a lot of people have given it a lot of slack, and philosophers didn't consider it as a valid argument, even though to me it's a very strong and profound argument. But that's not what convinced me. Let's talk about a piece of dust, a dust particle. Even though the dust particle in and of itself is still a complex thing. To me and you, it's not complex, but in and of itself, it is complex. For it to be a dust particle, it had to be made up of molecules, and these molecules had to bind in a certain way for it to have the texture that it has, and for it to have the feeling that it has, and the stiffness. And these molecules are made of atoms, and these atoms, they're complex in their own way compared to us. We have our races, and we have our communities, and we have our species. We're humans, and there's dogs, there's another species. But for atoms, you have, for instance, hydrogen, you have nitrogen, you have these are quote-unquote different species, and amongst these species, let's say carbon, you have carbon 12, carbon 14. These are almost like races. So there's a lot of complexities and a lot of governing scientific laws that govern the bindings to the detail. But even then, I'm not going to talk about these. Let's pretend this dust is not complex. Let's pretend it's just a dust, it's just a piece of dirt. I started thinking, you know what? When we go back to the explanation of how did this come about in the first place, you have the Big Bang. Let's say there's the Big Bang theory, and the Big Bang theory, there's a big massive ball of gas, huge, and it exploded, and when it exploded, the planets came about, and this is proven by, or this is supported by, the law of randomness. Everything's random, moves in randomness. But here the question comes. We still can't answer it. How did this come into about in the first place for it to explode? Let's say it was a piece of dust. How did this dust come into about? Just anything, that thing that exists. How did it come into existence? I reached two conclusions. It's either that piece of dust was at one point nothing, and then it made itself, where it just poofed. It's like you have vacuum, there's nothing in existence, and that piece of dust it was not there, and then all of a sudden, poof, it was there. Okay? Or that piece of dust existed always. It always existed. It was never non-existent. It always was there. And when you think about it now, for me, there was no way for me to accept the fact that it just came out of nothing. Like, what do you mean it came out of nothing? What made it come out in the first place? If it came out of nothing, what made it come out? What made it just come into existence? And then if it existed forever, then this is saying that, wait, this thing was self-sufficient. It's an eternal matter. It was always there. Or if you want to talk about energy, energy was always there. Okay, fine. What made energy? How was it always there? You're saying that energy was eternal. And if we have, this is me talking to myself. I was actually arguing with myself, thinking about it within myself, trying to, because I was really questioning it. So I was thinking, what? If I'm saying that this was always there, and it was eternal, then why is it difficult to believe that there's an eternal, powerful being? And when you look at what the Quran says, the Quran is the book that Muslims believe in as the book of God, the book that God said, it's literally spoken. And when you look at the arguments in the Quran, it never really gives a lot of credit to atheism. It doesn't talk or argue against atheism too much, except for really literally one verse where God said, أَخُلِقُوا مِنْ غَيْرِ شَيْءٍ أَمْ هُمُ الْخَالِقُونَ. Were they created from nothing, or were they themselves the creators? That's it. You only have, and he doesn't mention the third option, which is, or was God the creator? So, was that dust created from nothing? Do you accept that for your mind? That it just came poof? Or was it that it created itself and it was eternal? And therefore, if it was eternal and always existed, then it was the cause of everything else that happened. And if that's the case, remember, we're talking about matter here. We're not talking about something that has a conscience. A dust particle doesn't have conscience. Energy does not have conscience. So what made it, what caused it to start creating everything else? What caused it to start, quote unquote, evolving into everything else? And to me, it's not a matter of, does God exist? It's not a matter of me thinking, oh, does he exist? Is he there? It's a matter of, what does he want me to do? It's a matter of, I know there's no other logical explanation for me that God exists. By the way, scientists don't have an explanation for how something came to existence in the beginning. They don't, but quote unquote, they're working on it. But you're not going to. There's no logical way. There's no possible method of finding out how did it come into without being in the first place. Something had to put it into place. But the reason why it's difficult for some people, I think, is because it's much easier for us to grab a hold of something that's tangible. For instance, like energy. Energy is not tangible, but it's something that we have scientific knowledge of. And if that's the case, something that's put into place, then it's much easier for us to say that matter always existed than to talk about a being that is beyond our understanding, perfection, something all-seeing, something all-powerful, something all-hearing. It's beyond our understanding because we don't see it in front of us. And it's something untangible, unthinkable. But when I think about it logically, there is no other solution in my mind other than seeing that there was a being that was eternal and had to be all-powerful in order for everything else to come into existence. And that's been the Vigilante Effect. I hope you guys enjoyed. Again, this is just me sharing my thoughts in my mind, and this is not in any way a belittlement of anybody else. And Hope you guys, if you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, well, that's just you. Peace.
That's a great ball. Oh, it's just gone wrong for him at the vital moment. That's the final score, 2-1 here. This is a headline result for the underdogs. A genuine surprise, not to say sensation.